Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the writer of comics like Death Metal, the upcoming American Vampire in 1976, and the currently being kickstarted Nocterra. It's Scott Snyder. Thanks for coming on, Scott.
Oh, it's a pleasure, David. It's good to be here, man. Thanks for having me.
So we're, pretty much entirely going to be talking about Nocterra, your new project with Tony Daniel, Tomu Mori, Darren Bennett, and Will Dennis as your editor. And I'm going to give a spiel on what it is, because you have this on the Kickstarter. I don't want to make you do it, but it's a story that takes place 10 years after the world is plunged into an everlasting night that turns all living creatures into monstrous shades. The only way to survive is to stay close to artificial light. There are rumors of sanctuaries, perpetually lit bunkers where the shade transformation can even be reversed, but most people assume that these are just legends. Enter Valentina Val Riggs, a skilled ferryman who transports people and goods along deadly unlit roads with her heavily illuminated 18-wheeler. When an old man promising sanctuary offers Val a job to drive him and his granddaughter up through the Rocky Mountains, she takes it, hoping there might be some truth to his claim. What she finds in the end, though, is something much more horrifying than any shade. Boom! That's the spiel. But I want to start at the beginning. So, I'm sure you've been asked to recreate that a million times. You nailed it. I mean, honestly, the Kickstarter write-up is perfect. But I want to start with what came first, because there's three main components that are deeply fascinating to me. So which came first, the idea of Nocterra, wanting to work with your buddy Tony Daniel, or your interest in doing it as a Kickstarter?
Oh, the idea. It was, the idea, then Tony, then the Kickstarter. The idea has been in my head for a while. I mean, it's a really simple concept. It's just built on a fear of the dark I had when I was a kid. And when you and I started talking earlier today in preparation for this interview, the 9-year-old that you could hear in the background, David, is the kid that inherited that fear. So watching him really struggle with that a couple of years ago in particular just gave me this idea, which was, what if nighttime never ended and it was just as scary as we tell our kids it isn't? And I knew I had something special. It's one of those simple, elegant, kind of almost, why hasn't anyone done it? It's so dumb and fun, and that kind of an idea. Mm-hmm. And so I knew it was going to be something I could use as a real kind of noisy, fun, personal book. It would be something different than what I'd done before, in that it's really high octane horror. It's kind of that you don't have a moment to breathe. There's no place safe. It's nonstop, just trucks careening along these roads, all this kind of stuff. And so I had it in my head for a while, and I wanted to do this new label called Best Jacket. Best Jacket is my company internally at DC. I've used it as my my LLC and that stuff for them to pay me through. So it's existed for a while, but I've always wanted to make it public and use it as a label. It's a portmanteau of my two older kids' names, Jack and Emmett. Jack's 13, Emmett's, like I said, 9, but now we have Quincy, and so I have to figure out some way of adding a Q to it in there. My wife was like, you can call it Jacket with a Q, and I was like, nobody's going to know how to pronounce that. I'm not doing that.
I just want to say really quick, I love the fact that you probably made so many comic fans Google the word portmanteau. I mean, I'm not saying that none of them knew it, but at the same time, when I saw that, I was like, oh boy, there's gonna be some Googling here.
Oh, the funniest thing is that word was used by Camilla, our campaign manager, when she wrote it. Yeah, Camilla, who's awesome, Camilla Zhang. And I had to actually remember what it was, where I was like, and then I was like, I'm going to use that. I sound smart. So and the idea was, I had this idea for the label, and I have a number of books. Some of them are more literary. One is like a historical fiction, barnstormer story from the teens, the 19-teens. Another one is like a straight up horror, but it's about old cinema. That's with Francesco Francavilla, the book we've been teasing. Another one is part prose. That's with Jock. And so I've been squirreling away at these books for a while. And when I had this idea, I was like, that's the one that will launch loudest and strongest and create an engine for the rest of the books if I can do it right, meaning a financial engine. I can kind of go out loud with the label itself. It's kind of something that drives straight up the middle, and I can bring people in, and I can start to use it as a billboard for all of this experimentation I want to do, both with artists that I've never worked with before. Some of them are, real up and coming talents, and then some of whom I've worked with before, but not in this capacity. And so the idea like lived in my head for a while, and I knew I wanted an artist that had a lot of muscularity and kind of dynamism and a kinetic feel to their art, something that had like heavy fisted, and kind of action chops, but also had done horror. And Tony and I had been friends since like 2010 when he and I switched that Detective and Batman, and I was like terrified the whole time I was on Detective, and I was doubly terrified when I found out I was going to be taking Batman, and then they told me it was going to be Bruce Wayne, and then they told me it was going to be number one, and then and then all of that. So I was a total mess, and Tony was quite kind about like walking me through how to kind of get through it and put the blinders on and just enjoy it, and it was really fun collaborating with him on Joker face kind of stuff and all of that back then too. So we remained friends, and then, we remained friends through family stuff, like, all kinds of, health stuff, family wise, birth of kids. Like, so we have like a real personal history, and we'd become friendly. And we kept talking about doing a creator own book together, but he was so busy with DC stuff, and I was busy with DC and indie stuff. And so finally about 2 years ago, after I had this idea, I knew that he was sort of the kind of person that I thought would be perfect for it. And I approached him at, I think it was San Diego. It was a con. It was it was San Diego. I can't remember if it was San Diego or WonderCon, but it was like, so it was, 2 of those ago, and just talked to him and said, listen, I have this idea. We don't have to do it for a while because I'm kind of chipping away at these different books. But I'd like it to be the first one out of the gate. And I want it to be kind of big and noisy. And he loved it. He was like, the main character makes me think of somebody I want to write for my daughters. He wound up contributing a lot to her backstory. His heritage, his background is, built into who she is, a lot of stuff like that. And so we were just, really energized to do it. And we started tinkering with it. We blocked out the story for the first few arcs, and we talked to Image about doing it, and they were really responsive. And we did designs, and then I plotted it out and did some scripts, and Tony was getting going on it. And, we were going to do it in such a way where my goal, and the thing with indie books, just in case, I don't know how in the weeds, like people, or how like inside baseball people,
extremely
like are up for with this.
Oh yeah, extremely.
I don't know.
No, my listenership is like, I mean, my recent guests included Jim Demonakos, who does like cons, and then like, so needless to say, my world is in the weeds.
No, and I've listened plenty of times, but I just, as a precursor,
sure.
I know people also want to hear, like, I don't know, when I'm on a podcast, they always want to hear like the juicier stories as well. So I don't mean to get too like put on my accountant's hat. But one of the things that when you do a creator-owned comic, generally, unless the indie publisher is going to give you in advance, you're doing it for free. So you're doing the book on your own with your artist, or you're paying the artist if you can, through essentially 6 issues before you really make any money. Because issue 1, you don't really make any money off the publication of issue 1 until about issue 3 comes out. It takes a couple of months before you start seeing royalties. So by the time issue 3 is out, you're working on issue 5 or 6. So it's really like, 7, 8, 9 months of work that you're doing almost on spec, and if you're paying your artist, and I can pay Tony, but I can't pay Tony and pay Jock and pay Francis Manipal. I'm doing another one with Francesca, all these people. I don't have that kind of money. Despite I feel like people think you're on Batman and you whatever. And
right.
Like, comic writers are not generally rich. I'm very lucky in what I've been able to do with DC and Witches and, ancillary right stuff with those things. But, I can't afford that kind of stuff with 3 kids and all of that. And the other problem is if it's on me, and COVID shuts everything down and I don't have streams of income from DC or from cons, I can no longer go to conventions. I can't pull levers that I could pull in other ways to make sure I can pay my artists, because the industry shuts down. You're in the hole, and you've asked your team to do work on the book for a while, and now you don't know if the book's coming out. You don't know if the publisher is going to go under because diamond collapses, you don't know, all of it becomes uncertain. And so we were working on the book pretty strong. And then it was before COVID hit that I started to get this idea. It was around January when there was, it was talks of this kind of stuff where I was like, what if we tried something different with this one? And what if we offered something personal and collectible, and reached out directly to fans, through Kickstarter, and said, what we'd like to do is offer a process edition of the book, something that shows you the script, something that shows you the art. And I don't give away a lot of scripts, mostly just because I don't want people to think that I have a format for them. Sure. Because I'm really proud. I'm proud of the fact that it was really Greg who taught me, among many things, that the best way to write, in my opinion, is to adapt your style artist to artist, ask them what they want to do. And so mine are pretty wildly different from one another. Like a Greg script and a Jock script, you wouldn't think they're by the same person in terms of formatting. But they're key aspects that are really core to how you can write a Marvel style or full script and still write the exact same thing, So anyway, that's a whole other conversation, or I'm happy to get into that on this one too. But ultimately, I was like, what if we give my script, we give your art, we do an annotated thing where we show why it changed the way it changed. We do designs, we add covers. I'll do a little short flash fiction about the first night after the day the sun didn't rise. Just cool stuff and stuff that will allow you as a backer to feel connection with us. We'll offer a class. I love teaching, teaching first issue writing. Tony will do craft stuff, like he'll do a lesson on figure drawing, all kinds of stuff like that. And no bells and whistles, like things like promos or prints you can get, but nothing like, pins and toys and, 3D covers or that kind of stuff or whatever. Trying to keep it really focused on the idea of connection. And then COVID hit, and really hit. And it was like, this is exactly why we want to do this. Not just for financial reasons, but because it allows us now, especially, to connect with fans directly at a time when all circumstances are just pushing us apart. So there's a pragmatic aspect, which is, there's an emotional aspect, which is, honestly, we all miss conventions. We all miss seeing fans. I love going to conventions. I mean, there's some that it's a hassle, like going to San Diego and that stuff, not because of the fans, because of all the corporate stuff you have to do, those big cons where you have obligations to DC and stuff like that, where you're meeting a lot of people behind the scenes, and different lunches and whatever. But I mean, meeting the fans and getting to say thank you to them, it sounds hokey, but that's something we do genuinely all look forward to, the people that I hang out with, Do
you mind if I share a really quick story?
Sure.
So there was this one time when I was at New York Comic Con, and do you remember when Artist Alley was back in that kind of airplane hangar type area?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
They would stick us all the way in the back corner.
I love that space because it was really open air, but it was really far away. But I remember I was walking, I think I was going to go to an interview, and I was walking down the hall, and you and Robert Kirkman were walking towards Artist Alley. And I swear to God, it looked like you guys were the Pied Piper, because you must have had 500 people tailing you. And everyone was like, oh my God, I got to get these guys autographs. And I was just like, this is so funny to see. It was just like you guys were having a normal conversation. And I honestly wasn't even certain as to whether or not you guys knew that you had this entourage behind you. Conventions remember that.
I pay all of them to make me look good. I just pay them. I mean, I genuinely really do I love going to cons and meeting fans. I know everybody says it, but I really believe it's true pretty much across the board with the people that I know and hang out with. There's no reason to do this if you don't enjoy that kind of connection, because that's what writing is, it's what art is. You're trying to express yourself in a way that touches someone and shows them what you're afraid of, see if they're afraid of the same thing, what you're hopeful about, all of that stuff. So, for me, the emotional aspect of the campaign is that we wanted to really circumscribe it with those priorities. And then the pragmatic aspect of it was, look, I mean, the series is committed to Image. It's coming out, but this way, if we could do a Kickstarter that would fund the first 6 issues, then we have enough money to pay ourselves through the time at which the book will become self-funding. So once it's self-funding, we're up and running, and that's great. But And however it does, and it'll live or die by the quality of the book and the market and that stuff. But this way, the other benefit is that, not to get too inside like baseball in terms of stuff you're not supposed to talk about, but indie publishers too, like they will sometimes give advances to bigger creators, or they will make sure that if, there's the bigger creators need funding, they can find page rate funding and that stuff. And I have never done that. We've never looked for funding or taken it on Witches or any of that stuff from Image or whatever. But when if COVID hit and we were in the middle of the book, of course we'd be like, hey, listen, so Tony doesn't have to go do DC and Marvel stuff. Can you help us with one issue? If I can't, I would do it myself, first of all. And in that situation, I would be able to pay myself. But in the hypothetical situation where COVID shuts things down for 3, 4, 5 months, and that kind of thing, I wouldn't be able to pay for that many issues from Tony and Tomeo, who's a superstar colorist, plus the letterer, plus the editor. It starts to be like, listen, guys, go do other work. And then when everything reopens, come back to this. And then you lose people. So there's that. But the point I'm trying to make is that we didn't want to be in a position where we were taking any resources from Image, and I didn't want to be in a position where I'd be taking resources in general from any indie publisher with any of the books I was doing, because I think that those resources are better spent on emergent creators and on books that are, are from up and comers. And I mean that sincerely. Like, I remember what it was like when I was doing American Vampire and handing it out for free and watching people take it and then throw it out. And then I would go get it and, put it back on the table at C2E2. So there's the last thing I want to do is be sucking up oxygen that could be used for somebody that's coming up. All of that, it just felt like good practices. But on top of that, it's practical, right? So for me, the campaign, the thing that I really try and drill home to people is that what I wanted to do with it was try a new business model. And the business model of Kickstarter generally is you make a book, and it's exclusively available through Kickstarter, the whole book. And then you make a second book, or, the book lives on Kickstarter. And then eventually you find a distributor, and if you decide to, and then put it out in stores. But most books, you don't really, I haven't seen many books that are on Kickstarter in stores, or pushed to stores in any real, big comprehensive way. So the idea is that I think with us, we're committed to Image already. We have a series coming out, but the goal was to make sure that we didn't do anything with Kickstarter that would step on that direct market cachet. Meaning, like, I don't want to hurt retailers. And if I put out a book on Kickstarter and then I put the same book out in stores, it hurts retailers if people buy it on Kickstarter, don't buy it in stores. It hurts retailers in that they can be, people could get it on Kickstarter, sell it on eBay before all that kind of stuff. So it cuts into the sales and it makes retailers unhappy. So the goal here was to do something that was a process edition, something really different, kind of an inverted looking book that was unlettered, no balloons, script art, all of that, black and white. And it could be used as a promotional tool for retailers if they want it, and to actually offer a retailer tier through a separate track called Corner Box, where they can get the book at practically cost. Like, pretty much, we're not really making anything from that aspect of it. But whatever we make, we're giving 10% anyway to BINC in general. But it's designed, which is a charity that but for people out there, supports comic stores during these times and independent bookstores. But the idea is that we wanted to allow retailers to buy as many copies as they wanted. It has a different dust jacket, so people buying the campaign book through Kickstarter directly, no, it's slightly different, so you're not getting the exact same thing. But we wanted retailers to be able to have a softcover version of the book. We're probably going to upgrade it to a hardcover as a thank you, because we've made enough, and just give them that, to be able to say, here's the book for you guys. You can sell it at the same price that we sell it at Kickstarter. It's clearly a different version, but it's the same guts. And to do that. So the whole campaign is what we're trying to do is do something that helps the direct market, connects with fans, and offers something new, like a bridge between these two things. It's not like Kickstarter doesn't have to be competitive with the direct market. You can find ways of using it to connect to your audience and say, and use that connection to say, get excited about what I'm eventually going to publish in a way that also helps stores. So that was the goal. And weirdly enough, I've seen a bunch of small campaigns doing the same thing simultaneously, and it's really exciting. I do feel like it's kind of business practice that speaks to, the moment in a more acute way with COVID, but I think it's more of a seismic shift that was happening anyway, where, people consume entertainment differently. I watch my kids, like my 13-year-old, he and his friends, they're all into Cheers, and that was my show. I love Cheers. And what you start to realize is it's so subjective now. There's no central like fountain of like Thursday night, 9 p.m. comedy, whatever it was when we were kids. It's they find what they want and insulate themselves in that. And that can be a really inspiring, wonderful thing. And it can be a really destructive thing, which is what like Undiscovered Country is about and all of that, where you wrap yourself up in your own beliefs and hide in your own silo, and there's no kind of collectivism. But with this, I think the goal is to kind of say, we're at a moment where people are desperate for connection and authenticity and finding something that they feel is theirs. That's what I mean. They don't respond generally to corporate events or to big sort of blanketed appeals. They're people and, musicians are coming up through YouTube. They're coming up through TikTok. They're coming up through things where it's all that you want people that you feel you've discovered. And so for people like us who are established, the goal is to come down a notch and say, this is who we are. This is what we want to do. This is why we care about these things. Here, you can get it unvarnished this way. You can see behind the curtain that. And I think that kind of thing is going to be, you're going to see more and more and more of it in 2021. I really do. I think you're going to see more and more creators reaching out directly to their audience and circumventing some of the more conventional channels. Not, just because I think that's the moment. I think it's a good thing in a lot of ways as well. And I'm excited about it. It's the Best Jacket is built on, that kind of, I want to be able to be nimble and decide if I'm doing a book and I want to try and do it with a conventional book publisher instead of comic book. If I want to do something, I spoke to Brian Vaughn the other day about using Panel Syndicate for one of them. There's all kinds of, I want to experiment and be exciting to myself and make fans feel that I'm trying to tailor each project organically to the audience in a way that speaks to what the thing is about, and try different things. So it's not all, I'm so tired of, and I'm so appreciative of everything I've been able to do at DC, and I love being there, and I'm not leaving, but I've done so little creator owned in the last 10 years compared to what I wanted to do when I started in comics. And the channels that you go through for DC, they have a wonderful publicity department. I love Clark and Michael and all, and who's not there anymore now, but Clark is wonderful and all that. I love Jonah too. He's gone as well. But the idea being, they always did a great job, but you go through the conventional channels, being able to be completely mobile and say, you know what, for this book, I'm doing nothing. I'm going to surprise everybody and just drop this book. Not Nocterra, but another one I'm thinking of. Just be like, I'm just going to put it out on Panel Syndicate one day. No one will know it's coming. And this other one be like, I want to hype this one for like a year. I want to like put something out and like let people know it's coming because it's going to be that kind of book. That sort of flexibility to be honest about each book and what it is, and to reach out to fans with more of a kind of personal and intimate appeal. I don't know, man. I'm very excited. I'm sorry. I feel like I'm like, am I even on an interview, or am I just on the couch, like just talking to myself, thinking like, you can do this, Scott. It's going to be good.
I believe in you. Well, obviously there's a lot I can jump on here, but I think really what you're kind of getting down to is I have this long-standing idea that a lot of the things that we love the most in comics, we love them because they're not what we expect, or they're not delivered in the exact same way we expect. Like, you mentioned Panel Syndicate. I remember when Private Eye first was announced, and Private Eye came out, and all of a sudden there was a Marcos Martin and a Brian K. Vaughan comic that we can buy, that we can just pay whatever we want. And it was like, immediately, it was like the only thing anybody was talking about on social media. Or like, even when Friday came out from Brubaker and Marcos, and I talked to Ed about that, and he was just like, I couldn't believe how many people were responding. I just asked them like who was their favorite character when they were younger, like in this Friday sort of vein, and he said that there was like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of responses of people just wanting to connect about that. And in all these different things, I think that's what you're getting to is that, there's convention, and then there's ways that the world works today where anything can happen any sort of way. And I think that's kind of like what you're tapping into. Like, another Kickstarter example, going back, the first project I can remember that was really kind of doing the page rate route for Kickstarter was Amy Reeder and Brandon Montclair's Rocket Girl. They did an image book, but they originally paid for like the page rate using Kickstarter, and it was a great success. The difference that I think is really crucial to the success, the thing that you kind of tapped into here, is you found a way to keep the retailers happy, because retailers, one problem with Kickstarters is when you, like, let's say I'm selling my first issue here, then retailers are like, why do I want to order that? You already sold it to most of your audience. Like, that can have a diminishing returns element. And then on top of that, you like the hardcover, I think, is really the most clever part about it. It's like this oversized matte finish signed thing. And then on top of that, it's limited to 5,000, which, I know you said on the Kickstarter, get the con experience without waiting in line. But the thing about that is it like, it immediately tells people to be excited, because there's something that if they get it, they're one of only 5,000 people that can say that they got that. And when you kind of combine that all together, I don't know. I mean, I remember when, David Hyde, the guy you're working with for marketing, he emailed me about it, and I was just like, man, this is really interesting. There's just like, there's something about this in terms of the way you're approaching it, because it kind of makes people wake up and be like, hey, I can get something a little different that I can say that no one else got if I back this thing. And it builds like a sense of urgency and a sense of interest. And that's something that's hard to do. I mean, with comics, it's so often buried in like the 3-month cycle of like, it's going to come out to comic shops and you need to promote it then, and then you need to promote it at this next time. It's easy to kind of sleepwalk through that. And this breaks 100%. Through the sleep.
Yeah. I mean, I'm telling you, man, it's funny, David, because I feel like there's sort of 3 things at work when you work in comics a lot of the time, like three eyeballs. One is just completely creative. It's like when you're on a character, whether it's Batman or you're making your own stuff, it's making something personal and, you're passionate about, and that's first and foremost always, you know what I mean? Like I feel good about the fact I've never put out a book. Not that I wouldn't have if I had to break into the industry. I just had an incredibly lucky ride where I got in, and they gave me detective like from go. And, I fought to get Jock and Francesco on, but they let me, and that. So so I'm not knocking having to, do the work
sure.
on shitty jobs but I haven't had to do that. But there's that, like, that's one leg of the stool, let's say, right? Which is the most important, making stuff you care about. Then there's kind of like the internal, like sort of understanding, I think, in some ways, if you're working in corporate comics in particular, like the political machinations of what's going on at the place you're working, right? So there has to be like to get this thing I really want to do through, I know I have to talk to this editor. I better be careful about this, or this guy isn't going to like it. But if there's all that,
mm-hmm.
And there's many ways in which like none of my stories would have happened if I didn't, and I wasn't good at that. Just so you understand, I was just like, I was honestly, when I started at DC, pretty much an asshole in that department, where I was so upset and angry that I was on detective, when I was, because I felt like that was the thing that I had been dreaming of and that I needed like 10 years to get good enough to do. And they put me on it my first year, and I was sure, it was like if you've always dreamed of being a baseball player, and then you're like playing in your backyard, and then they're like, guess what? We're going to draft you for the major leagues. You skip the minor leagues, and your first game is you're pitching in Game 7 of the World Series. You know what I mean? Like, that's how it felt. And I had the tremendous imposter syndrome. I was so self-destructive in many ways, like that first year.
I do want to say, it's funny to me because Black Mirror is awesome. I love Black Mirror.
Oh no, I mean, don't get me wrong. Like I'm crazy proud of those stories. It's not that I didn't I believed in what I was making, but I was so
You felt like you were a
sure
fraud.
that I felt like I was a fraud, and I almost like I genuinely almost ruined my marriage those first 2 years about how much time I spent like combing over every panel of everything in those first 2 years. And there are things that I think I love those stories dearly, but that would be better if I had like loosened up a little bit. You know what I mean? Like I can see it now in knots in the stories from like, if you had just relaxed and like let this be emotionally a little bit more and like but it doesn't matter. The point I'm trying to make is that, there's the creative, there's kind of the internal thing, if you're working in corporate comics, especially. But the other thing that I think is important, honestly, is understanding the moment and where the fans are with, again, a lot of this is about like corporate comics because that's where I've been for a long time. But understanding the math of where fans are with you, with with the characters you're using, with the company you're at, all of that stuff. So like, for example, doing something like Metal, that's a story that I wanted to do for a while. And Death Metal I pitched when I pitched Metal. So Death Metal is like my absolute eulogy, love letter, everything I think about DC Comics and also this moment in comics. It's like deeply about this exact moment. The ending, I hope, makes it like very clear, but it's all that. But the way, when I do those things, I have to understand, for example, are fans sick of events? Okay, well then I have to counter program that, and say, and not change the story. The story is always what you want it to be. You understand? Like I never change what I'm doing. Like when I do, for example, when I made Commissioner Gordon Batman, right? I knew people were going to hate that and be upset and all of that, but I knew I loved the story and I was going to do it anyway. But the way I had to do it was to acknowledge it in the first pages by Commissioner Gordon looking at the camera directly at one point because he's like filming something or whatever it is. And he's like, I just want to say this is the stupidest idea in the history of Gotham City. And he's like, now give me my Batmobile. Like, let's go have some fun. And you have to you have to know where they are and respect where they are and then give them what you want in a way that like moves through almost what they want, you know what I mean? Or acknowledges what they want. And so those three things to me are are all part of being in comics. It's not like you have to do any of them except the first. You can be completely, I don't care about, internal politics if I'm working in a comic book company. You can be, I don't care about where the fans are. I'm just doing my thing. And you can still be super successful, super talented, whatever it is. But for me, it's always kind of, it's the first is absolutely pure and, never compromised. And the others are kind of a calculus that you're figuring out as you go to be able to kind of gauge how you shape what you're working on, especially in corporate stuff. So with this, like what you're saying, I think looking at the moment and understanding where people are and where you are as a fan, I think that it's a key thing right now to really try and be aware of how desperate people are for a connection, how scared retailers are, rightly, how scared all of us are that the industry is changing in ways that are going to, diminish the output of these companies, that parent corporate companies might constrain them in different ways, that you'll see less creativity, less, creator involvement. All those things are in the air in the zeitgeist. And it's important to not only kind of use them or, acknowledge them in superficial ways, but like feel them, and move through them as you're making something and say, what I want to do is make something that is responding to that in a way that I think is positive and trying to find ways through that. That's all of it. Doing something like Best Jacket for me is the ability to try new things that I hope will bridge, different aspects of comics in fun ways, so that if I'm able to do something on Panel Syndicate, but then have a publisher lined up, in a way that makes it even more confluent than just a pay what you want digital comic, or if I do something at a book publisher, being able to retain the rights to do mini comics that promote it here so I can pull comic audience over to read it in book. Like, all that stuff. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
It's
I
that.
mean,
Anyway, sorry, I'm like going on and on.
no, no, no. I mean, I think it's great. This is honestly, this is stuff I think about a lot, and I think it's really fascinating too because it's like, you know, I wrote this big piece on Webtoon. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Webtoon, but Webtoon,
Yeah, all the time. I'm fascinated by Webtoon.
yeah. So like Webtoon, like you look at some of their top creators, like there's this one cartoonist named Mongi who does this comic called Let's Play. Her name's not actually Mongi. They use a lot of people use pseudonyms on there, but and they basically they had this really successful book that they were, or comic that they were doing on Webtoon, and then they ended up doing a Kickstarter with it. And then on top of that, you can have a Patreon, and you can have this, and you can have that. And it's interesting because, you know, like I said, it's like I comics often feels like, or the comics in general often feels like it's everyone kind of does things the one way because that's the way you've always done it. But there's so many different ways you can kind of retrofit these things on top of each other. It's like, you know, Private Eye can be Private Eye on Panel Syndicate, and then it can have that awesome collected edition that they did did through Image. You know, you can do a Webtoon that you turn into, you know, Patreon where you can have behind the scenes stuff. But then on top of that, you can do a Kickstarter, and then you can sell the rights to it and this and that. And there's so many different ways to do things today that it just seems like reductive to not explore the possibilities. And I mean, honestly, I think that's the most exciting thing about Best Jacket to me. No offense to your comics, but the fact that like you are seemingly like you're in your mad science lab, Scott, and you're gonna put some beakers together and you're gonna go buck wild. And I think that's great.
Oh, that's exactly it, dude. And that's why I'm excited. I've been in. I gave myself 10 years where I was like, I want to do everything I want, and then I still have things left. I mean, I have one big thing. I have two things, but one is a Nightwing thing, which I've like teased before. That was approved. So I hope I still can do it, or I get to do it. It's more a matter of scheduling. But the other thing is like a big thing that I believe in that will also hopefully usher in more creators and stuff like that too. Mm-hmm. It's a comic, but it creates a different like a fun ecosystem of stuff that I want to, you know, build on some of the teaching I did and that stuff to be able to, you know, invite other people in. But you know, I gave myself like 10 years where I was like, if I at the end of 10 years, if my priority isn't my creator owns, then, you know, I have to switch that. And every year when I was at DC, you know, I always did creator own. I couldn't do one without the other. Mm-hmm. You know, so I always had something going. But there's so much I wish I had done, and a lot of the books that I'm doing now through Best Jacket are books that I've been tinkering with forever, or for 5 years or 6 years, and then retooling and that stuff. And so they're all in like different levels of production. You know, some of them are 30 or 40 pages drawn right now. Some of them are just starting. Some of them the artist can't start for 6 or 7 months, sure. And then but it's committed, and they have the script, and we're contracted together. And so for me, it's like all different, exactly like you're saying, like just total science experiment. Where, for example, like there's the creative experiment where it's like, let's do something we haven't tried, where I'm writing one that's like literally about a barnstormer I told you earlier in the early 1900s, 19 teens, right after World War One, and it's just about him flying around the country. He crashes into a wedding one night. He thinks it's like a party for him, and he crashes into it. And then they kind of beat him up. And then the next morning when he's leaving in his plane, the bride is waiting there with a suitcase being like, take me with you. And that's the beginning of the story. And it's totally different than what I'm like, it couldn't be more different than Nocterra or whatever. But like, that's a book, for example, I'm like, well, what if we try that in a way where we release that like through a subscription thing? What if I do it in a way where it's serialized, you know, and it's just, if we create enough of it ahead of time where it's just a couple pages a day, but we do it every day for like 60 days or something, you know, and you just buy the comic as a subscription, or you buy it and let's just try it. Why not? Who knows? You know, maybe that will be, because he's traveling, you know what I mean? It's all 2-day jumps. Like you go somewhere, you land there, you're there in a plane for a couple of days, you sleep under the wing, you take off again. It fits the format. You know, then there are other things like doing with big creators, you know, or creators that are like, you know, super heavy hitter involved in like, you know, some of the biggest, like everybody I've worked with in the past, like I've tried to pull in some way or other to this. So you'll see a lot of familiar faces, but like, let's say I'm working with somebody who's like a big star I've worked with, right? Be like, well, what if we did something with that where we go straight up, you know, straight direct market, but we do it in such a way where we make sure that whatever we would do, we're retaining not just like the movie and TV and stuff rights, but merchandising rights, so that we can make, because I'm like, what if we get Todd or somebody to help us make a statue of our character, and we do that because this is the kind of book that I would have loved to have a statue from when I was a kid, because it's this monsters and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
Everything is just, it's this kind of trying to find the best organic, like sort of synergy between the making of the book, what the book's about, how you make the book, how you distribute the book, what comes with it, all of those things, so that you're never gouging people. It's not like a peg in a square, the round peg in a square hole, that kind of shit, where you're forcing it through, in a direct market in a way that it doesn't really belong there. All that kind of stuff. And I've learned those lessons in different ways. Like AD After Death was a book that Image was so kind to us with that. I love them for putting that book out, but I should have done that book through a book publisher with Jeff in a different way. You learn it over the years,
Mm-hmm.
or books that you do, like, things like The Wake, which, as much as I love that we got to do it with Doyle, who's one of my closest friends, I wish I had done that book outside of DC, because I would have broken it differently and done different, and all those things, now that I have more
perspective,
more leverage. Yeah, more leverage.
Oh, sure.
And more, just more. I have more, just more ability. I have just more standing and more of a platform. I can try all those things. Have more of an audience.
Yeah.
And perspective.
I mean,
yeah.
You mentioned prose too earlier. I mean, that ties into something else. Like, another project that was one of the biggest books of the last year is, like, you look at what Jonathan Hickman did in House of X and Powers of 10. I mean, like, the design breaks and, like, the prose sections of that aren't, like, something we've never seen before in any comic ever, but it was something that was radical and new for a Marvel comic. And it's like, I don't know. It's like a lot of what you're trying to do is trying to wake people up and make people pay attention, because it's different and it's something that stands out. I do want to say, though, that I think that there is something very clever about using Nocterra as as the first book that you launch with. So I obviously Raina Telgemeier is a big deal, and I always say that one of the reasons why I think it's really easy for anyone to read Smile, one of her most popular graphic novels, because
I love that book.
It's a great book, yeah, and it's like, I think anyone can appreciate it because we all have teeth and we understand, like, the things that come with, like, that type of stuff.
Like trip and
yeah. There's, like, a universality to it, and, like, there's another thing that is also really universal and weirdly primordial, and that's, like, everyone's kind of afraid of the dark. Like, I read an interview with you where you were talking about how you'd go outside with a flashlight and then turn off and try to, like, immerse 100%. Yourself in it. So when I was a kid, I would time myself when I was in the dark. I would come up with these arbitrary rules of how long I could be in it before something bad would happen, and I'd be so desperate to get out of it. And I think that there's something universal about that fear that makes the idea of Nocterra very appealing. It's like, I don't know. I mean, I think that's one of the interesting things about horror stories. I'm not a huge horror guy, but at the same time, there's something very universal about being afraid of something, and I think that helps.
Yeah, I mean, thank you. I mean, and for me, I mean, horror, when it's done right, it sounds hokey, but I honestly think it's sort of like the purest form of conflict, where I've loved it since I was a kid. I've told this story before, but when I grew up in New York City, and there was a video store near where I lived called the Video Stop on 26th Street and 3rd Avenue. It was one of the last video stores too. It lasted a long time, but they wouldn't rent R-rated movies to kids, but they would deliver them to your house if you called. And so it was like this neighborhood secret. And I just rented all of these horror movies as a kid. I had, like, terrible anxiety, fear of the dark, all this stuff. And horror movies made me feel better. I'd, like, I'd be scared, and then it was over. You know what I mean? And that kind of feel of, like, a controlled or mitigated experience with it. But they were all kind of corny slasher films and that stuff. And I remember one day, I was like 10, maybe, younger. I rented, and my friends, we'd all get together and, like, watch, like, Sleepaway Camp 2 and all these kind of stupid 80s slasher films. And I got Night of the Living Dead. And then I was like, oh, this is black and white. Like, I'm going to watch this myself before I have to embarrass myself in front of my friends. And I watched it. I really didn't like it. I didn't know why. It, like, upset me. And then, I had started having nightmares, honestly, about, zombies and death, all these kinds of things. And it's become my favorite film. Like I kept revisiting it years later, being like, why am I so bothered by that movie? And what it made me realize is it was just such a perfect horror movie in terms of like a crystallization of what good horror does. It's merciless, and it's like in the way in which it has the monster in the film just be sort of a reflection or a mechanism by which the worst aspects and the worst fears about humanity are made material, So like in good horror, your absolute most nightmarish anxieties become something real that stalks you. So you're up against the things that you're most afraid of, To me, that's conflict. I bring that same compass or lens when I'm doing Superman. What is Superman most afraid of? He's most afraid, in Metal, for example, Darkseid articulates it, where he's like, you're most afraid that they won't live up to what you think they are, and that you should be controlling them. You know what I mean? Like if you that kind of thing. So that's a horror plot, though. That's a horror movie when that happens, like when his worst fear is brought to life. So for me, horror is that. It's like you up against your absolute worst fears about the world, about yourself, about humanity, whatever that is, either sort of personified in a monster, or that the monster is sort of a pressure cooker element that then brings those things out of the people trying to survive the threat.
Yeah.
So yeah, Nocterra for me, like it's like right in there that way, where it just gives me a lot of room to move. And even though it's like this big bombastic thing, it really is about this moment too, in the way that, it's a world where everybody is living in these small outposts that are artificially lit. Everyone has like costumes or gear that's light up. So if you don't have a lot of money or resources, you got like light bulbs hanging off your hat, and
Yeah.
if you're a mercenary, you've got like the LED suit and the Tron looking thing. But ultimately it's that the darkness is creeping in, changing us into things that are monstrous, because it separates us, it's this darkness kind of pushing everybody apart. Everyone's fighting over the last little bits of light. And at the end of the day, it's this thing that drives us apart and changes us into things we don't recognize anymore, because we can't. And the only way to defeat it, and that this becomes clear by the end of the first arc, or the only way to figure out what it is, because the mystery of like why it happened, and is it supernatural, is it this or that, all that stuff is like one of the big engines of the series, is to connect with other people, to find your way through it and find some kind of collective ambition to solve it. So to me, it's very resonant. It's like, it's about this moment in a very figurative or abstract way, but in an emotional way. So that's why it's not just kind of, trucks with crazy light guns on them.
That's pretty cool too. But at the same time, it's like, there's a purity to those types of ideas. Like when you were talking about Night of the Living Dead and kind of how it made you feel and what it made you think of, it made me think of The Thing, which I absolutely love. Like,
it's one of my top 5 favorite movies ever too.
It's so good. Yeah. Like what you're talking about and how it's like revealing things about yourself and revealing like how you handle things and everything like that. It's like you watch The Thing and it like almost makes you understand yourself a little bit better in a weird way. And I think all that's really fascinating. I do have to ask though, as somebody who lives in Alaska, I'm curious if you know do you know what a sad lamp is?
Oh yeah, like the solar light that makes you happier.
Yeah, for a seasonal affective disorder.
I got one when we first moved out to Long Island, where we live now. I was working on this book. I don't know if this is like too offbeat a story.
Go for it.
But I always wanted to be in comics. I wanted to be a comic book artist and writer. So all through high school, I had a portfolio, and I used it to apply to college. When I went to school in Providence for college and at Brown, and I went there mostly because RISD was there, and I wanted to take. I was told you could take classes at RISD in illustration, if you got in, and that you could do both, even though you were at the other school. But one was on a trimester program, one was on a semester program, which I didn't realize, and it made it like impossibly hard to coordinate. You'd have to like stay through your Christmas vacation to be on, all this crazy stuff, but you couldn't stay in a dorm. So it was all a mess. Mm-hmm. So I wound up falling more into writing, just writing prose. And it was a great moment in prose, like in the late 90s, early 2000s, when there was this big short story renaissance and all this stuff. And so I went to I bummed around like for a couple years to say screw you to my parents, where they were like, if you want to be a writer, you should work at the New Yorker, work at the publishing houses. And I did that for a bit, and it was miserable. Although it was quite fun. Like I interned one summer at a publishing house where my whole job was to like read slush, which is like unsolicited novel ideas. And it's like the stuff nobody wants to touch. And this is still pre 9/11. Like now no one would touch it. But back then, like, you just open up a manuscript from Kalamazoo and be like, what is it? And it would be like on loose leaf or whatever. And some of them were like, they were so endearing. Like some of them had such good ideas, and all that stuff too. And you'd be like, why don't you read that? And it was never going to get through, no matter what you said. But I do remember, I'm so far down a rabbit hole, but I'm going to tell you this anyway. I remember like my favorite one was about Jesus being cloned from the Shroud of Turin by these like archaeologists and geneticists.
Wow.
But when he was cloned, he was really small. Like he's like this small kind of gnarled dude. They got it. I don't know if it's like, it wasn't very clear if like they kind of like didn't do it right or whatever, but he was only like 3 feet tall, like 3 or 4 feet tall. And they were like really afraid that this would like, upset everybody. And anyway, in the story, all of these like crazy organizations are trying to find them and hunt them down and kill him because he's this abomination and all this stuff. And there was this point, I remember they kept like shuttling him around like E.T. and like a blanket everywhere and all this stuff. And at one point they're on these swamp boats, like trying to get away from these like nefarious, whatever crazy like organizations trying to kill them. And they're like, they're gaining on us and we can't get away and whatever. And Jesus suddenly throws off his blanket and he's like, I got this.
Oh my God.
And he picks up these 2 guns off the swamp boat and he's like firing. And I was like, this is approved. Green light. I love this book. And never made it through. But anyway, I did that stuff for a few years and then I went to grad school and I, wound up getting lucky and publishing some stories after. I paid my dues those years. Like those were the years I tutored rich kids and taught high school, which I loved teaching high school, but it was rough, and I sent out hundreds of stories there, like, stories that didn't get it anywhere. And I finally broke in. And then I was writing short fiction and I was working on a novel when essentially I got into comics. And the way that it happened, and I honestly, I swear to you, David, I don't even remember why I went down this path.
Sad lamps.
Question.
Sad lamps.
Oh, thank you. That is going to be that will be the end point. Like in the third act of this, story.
The second act was incredible. There was Jesus with guns. I'm really into that. A 3 foot tall Jesus with guns.
Yes, and he was like, for some reason, he had all these spots on him. I don't remember why. Like, it was never explained.
I would buy that book.
He was basically he looked like a Muppet. Was really what it was. Anyway, so what happened was I had luck with my short story collection after a bunch of years, and the same publisher bought a novel on spec, and so the novel. It was about aviation in the 1920s, and it was about this race to see if anyone could fly across the country in 30 days or less, and all this stuff. And I love it. I still wish I loved working on it. The economy collapsed when I was working on it in 2007, 2008, and the publisher Random House was basically like, to give you the money we're supposed to give you for this book, it has to really sell well. So think about that, and I was like, and they were very nice, but I was suddenly like, and there's a love interest and there's explosions and like, I just totally bastardized this book. And for about a year and a half, I lived that life you see in the TV shows and movies about writers where like their editor calls and they're like, oh, it's coming tomorrow. And like, you're not doing it and you're drinking too much and you're a mess and all of that. And it was in this period where I remember like, we had a mortgage, we were having our first son and I was just miserable. And I got this offer from a buddy of mine who was like, listen, if you want to write a short story for this anthology I'm doing, cause he loved comics too. he was sort of like, it's going to be prose writers make up new superheroes, and it should be really fun. So I'm like, you know what, I'm going to do that for $200. And so I'm doing it, and my wife's like, why are you doing this story for $200? Like, if you finish this novel, we can not be in the hole. And I was like, you know what, I just give me like 2 weeks to do it, because I'm so miserable. Like, I hate my life. Working on this book. Please, like, let me just have this one little bit of fun. And she was like, okay, do it. And I wrote this story, The 13th Egg, and it's about a kid who's in he's after World War II. He's just a sailor on the Bikini Atoll tests and the nuclear tests. And he develops these powers and this stuff after. And I loved working on it. And so I went to the reading for the book when it came out, and Mark Doyle, who just got fired, but was the head of Vertigo and then Black Label, and one of my absolute best friends in the world, was there. And so was Janine Schaefer from Marvel. And they came up to me separately and were like, does anybody here like comics, And then they came up to me and were like, you seem like, I said I did. And then they came up to me afterwards and they were like, you really like them? And I'm like, I have a bunch in my bag. I came here from Forbidden Planet. And they were like, I said, it's all I've ever wanted to do, but I can't draw well enough. And they were like, well, do you want to pitch for stuff at Marvel and DC? And then I did, and I wound up working for Mark and American Vampire. It took a while to get it through. It was like, I still remember exactly where I was, like when they finally told me it got in. They rejected it at first. And
oh, wow.
They basically, Will, who's my editor now, had to reject it. And he was like, listen, it's just too much of a Western. And I was like, it's not a Western though. It's about Pearl. And they were like, well, I don't know, man, that's the way they saw it, Dan and Paul Levitz and them. And, we can't do it right now. And so I went home and I rewrote the entire thing from Pearl's point of view. And I was like, please read this. And then they read it and it went through and that. And I remember I was like outside my kid's daycare when I got the call that they were going to accept it. And I was like, I like visibly remember like tearing up about it. But anyway, I started working for both of them and I didn't know they were dating, which was hugely embarrassing because Mark would be like, how's it going at Marvel? And I'd be like, my editor's great, except, she never gives me any notes. And then all of a sudden I get all these notes from Janine and then she'd be like, how's it at DC? And I'm like, it's good, but my editor doesn't call a lot, And then all of a sudden I get like 10 calls from Mark, and I'm like, being the worst Batman ever, I never put that together. They were dating. Now they're married. They have 2 kids, Marvel DC crossovers. And then they're wonderful. But, the going back to the lamp, which I'll get to, while I was working, before I got to pitch for them, when they asked me to pitch, I was still working on this novel, and I started to really spend time making up pitches for something that was really similar at one point to John's, and he had no idea I ever pitched anything like this, but a series that was similar to like what he did with S.H.I.E.L.D. at the beginning. It was like a history of kind of the Marvel universe through the parents of different characters, and I pitched all this kind of ambitious stuff. And my wife, again, was like, why are you pitching for comics if you just finished this book? And I was like, I'm just going to be honest with you. Like, I hate working on this book. I feel like they're never going to accept it. We're broke. I know we're broke. Like, I'm borrowing money from my parents. Like, I don't know what to do. But this is the only thing that's making me happy. And but I will give it up 100%. Like, you're right. And she was like, fuck that. Like, let's take out another loan. She was in med school. She was like, take another loan against my med school stuff. But if you're going to do it. Like dissolve whatever book deal you have left. Like, take the hit and just say you're not doing it, and just like make the leap. So she's the best. And so I did that. And I started working in comics, and it was great. I keep jumping the lamp part. So the lamp comes in at the absolute worst point. The lamp comes in, we moved to Long Island, like where we live now. We lived in this like totally shitty condo. It was like, you weren't even allowed to nail anything into the wall because everybody moved out. You know what I mean? So it was just like, you lived in a white box with this terrible carpeting. And like all you could do is they gave you sticky shit to put the stuff on the wall. Eventually melt, and it would like gloop down the walls. It was just like the most depressing David Lynchian place ever. And we lived there, and we only had one crappy car, and she took it to med school all the time. And so I was like home alone, and I would like walk to the grocery store or to Starbucks along this like highway, and I thought it was fine. I'm like, oh, I grew up in New York, you know, I'm in the city, I walk everywhere, and like you realize quickly that like nobody walks in the suburbs along these roads, and then you get to Starbucks and everybody's afraid of you because you're like the person that walked there, you know what I mean, from everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And it was this horrible period, and it was right at the time where I finally met Doyle and Janine, that I remember my wife being like, you need to turn it around. You need to, if you're going to really do this and break into comics and do this, you need whatever. And one of the first things I did, I swear to you, because I was genuinely depressed, you know, for quite a long time at this point. But I was just like trying to push through it, trying to write through it, trying to, you know, get that lamp.
Hell yeah.
I was like, I read about it and I was like, maybe this will help. And I wound up writing a story about it that I never published. It's one of my favorite stories about an old man who buys one of those lamps too at the end of his life and all of that. I love that lamp. It's called the Lux something, the one that I got. And it actually was like, because the fluorescent lighting in this place was horrible. It was winter. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no,
and it made me happy.
I live in the world of Nocterra though, because it's like Alaska, like during the winter in the normal situation when I'd actually go to an office, I would go to work and it would be dark, pitch black dark. And I'd leave work and it would be pitch black dark. And I would never see the sun during the winter. And it's like, sad lamps are like really like very popular in Alaska because of that exact situation, especially the further north you go. I mean, 30 Days a Night is like extremely factual. I mean, minus the vampire part, but the darkness part. But I mean, what I was thinking though was with Nocterra, I feel like those sad lamps would be like an extremely precious commodity. They'd be like so good for your state of mind, but also like incredible for protection because they're so damn bright. I mean, double threat. It's incredible.
Yeah. I know. I do. They're so bright. I remember turning it on and just being like, wham. And yes, I wrote like a whole story about a dude, an old guy that loses his best friend, and he winds up buying one of those lamps, and it like revives him.
They are like, incredible. Well, I just have a few more questions, but I did want to actually, you mentioned Camilla earlier, and there's two people involved with this that I wanted to ask about specifically because I just wrote this big feature on Kickstarter, and like Camilla Zhang is like one of the most like, you know, it's hard to find anyone who would ever say a bad thing about her. She's beloved. You know, former comics outreach lead at Kickstarter. She worked as your campaign manager. And then also Andy Schmidt did something. Andy Schmidt from Comics Experience, who, great guy.
He's our printer.
What's that? He's your printer?
He's our printer.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Because I was curious as to what both of them were doing, like what their role was. But I mean, if Andy's doing printing, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, he started his own printing service. It's ONS. And it's great. I love working with him, and he's terrific, and he's really guided me through all of it, and he and Camilla work closely together, and they're terrific. I can't recommend them more highly. They're great. And they're friends. Like I've really gotten to know Camilla in particular, but Andy too, you know, as you can tell, I get chatty like on the phone.
Sure.
But so I've gotten to know them both, and they're fantastic people, fantastic creators in their own right. You know, great writers both, and really just good people in the community. So I can't say enough good things about both of them. Yeah,
I mean, nobody knows Kickstarter and comics better than Camilla does. I mean, that's quite the person to have in your bag for that.
Oh yeah, no, you don't even know. She's like a superhero on this campaign, where she was just like, you need to do this. Where I'm like, wait, what? What's that? She's like, you need to go, there's like a backer update where people have questions about this and only you can answer it. Go do it. And I'm like, okay. And I do it. You know, like whatever she says, do it, you do it. And she's right. Like she's just been terrific. I can't like, I was saying, I don't want to get too in the weeds with this, with her, because it's her decision. But I was like, you could do this if you wanted to, you know, and be the person that knows this better than anybody because you're fantastic at it. Mm-hmm. But, you know, what I really respect also is that she's a creator and she wants to make books and that too. So I don't know if she'll do it again after our campaign. I have no idea, but I'm very glad that she signed on to ours because she has made it like a fantastic experience all around. And that's total credit to her.
I have to say, I've talked to a lot of people who are doing Kickstarters. You are by far like the least anxious sounding about the experience out of anybody I've talked to. I don't know if it's like because you're already like 4 times over your goal. I mean, that obviously helps as well. But at the same time, it's like, I know it can be a really stressful time. So something's working for you. Maybe it's the sad lamp, right? Although I guess you don't
Well,
have it.
I mean, I get stressed out. I mean, I'm more of like, you know, what's the worst case scenario? You know, that's my coping mechanism, is like the worst case scenario is that, you know, here, I mean, we've already done better than we expected to do. I'm not, also one thing is like, I'm not taking any money from it. Like, so
Right.
any of the money I make from it is going to go towards the next artist who we're going to announce really soon. I have a bunch of artists like I've talked about already who are like, you know, people know I'm working with on different things, but I'm really excited to work with somebody I've never worked with before, and she's great. And you know, so this has allowed me to already make sure I can do that with no worries whatsoever. So worst case scenario, the printing's more expensive, or we, you know, screw up the signing, or it doesn't, one of them gets wet, like a box, you know, I can see it coming. Like, I'm like, something's going to screw up,
Right.
and it will be stressful. But the worst case scenario is already still good, because what the campaign has proven to me is that this method of like reaching out to fans directly is effective, and they want that, and that's what I want too, you know. And that's again, it doesn't have to be through this thing. Like, I'm not planning on doing this for every book in Best Jacket. I don't think I'll do it again, not because it was hard, but just because I want to try different things, you know, and each book is very different. This book, I feel like, is perfectly suited for this kind of thing. Whereas another book, like the Jock book, wouldn't work this way, you know. Instead, it's better to try teasing people with like pages of it, because the whole book is designed by him. So it's going to be something that's like a physical artifact, you know, in that way, and be something that's a special edition thing. So it doesn't make sense. I mean, it makes sense to sell the whole thing here, but that's not what I want to do, you know? So it's reaffirmed my belief in trying to approach each project in a really individuated way, like in a singular way that's about that thing. And the more flexibility you have to try and do completely different things with each thing and surprise people and yourself, is the better. Honestly, like, you know, the worst thing, man, I swear, is to become fucking boring to yourself.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
That's it. You know? I'll tell you, the one time I felt that way in comics too was when I stopped doing creator owned, because I was so stressed out about doing Superman Unchained at the same time I was doing Batman. It was like my second year in Batman. So it was only like, you know, 2012 or something, 2012, 2013. And I just was so afraid of like screwing up Superman and Batman that I was like, I don't have time for anything else. And it was so soul crushing for a bit, where I was like, I don't have any place to go play that is outside of this matrix of DC stuff, where, you know, there are different calculations, like what I'm doing with Capullo on Batman and what I'm doing with Jim Lee on Superman, but they're not that different. You know, Superman is like, what was happening with him in the New 52 had kind of really strayed very far from core stuff. So it was about bringing him back to core. What was going on with Batman with us was like the opposite, where he had been true to core. We were just trying to branch out. But even so, all the same things are at work. Like, I'm still talking to Dan DiDio about this. I'm still figuring out where fans are with DC as a company, to they're angry at us or this and that. And it was so deadening, I swear. It was the only other point where I really would have broken out the sad lamp, being like, really, I mean, my wife will tell you, and Greg pulled me out of it. I was really depressed again for a bit, like, not like moping around. I was doing the work, but it was really hard. When I get depressed, the way it works is, it's like anxiety hits me, and anxiety, for people that don't have it, like, it's not just like being worried about something. It's more the feeling that your body goes into this like alarm mode, where you feel like you're having a heart attack, or it's like a panic attack about something that you know isn't that worrisome. Like, okay, so what if I write a bad issue of Batman or whatever? So what's the real worst case scenario? So people won't like it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at that time, it feels like your body is telling you it's like life and death. And then you calm yourself down, you go to do it again, 5 minutes later it happens again. And it's exhausting. Like, you physically feel like you can't stop panicking all day, every day, you know, in that way. And Greg pulled me out of it, where he was just like, one page at a time. I mean, Tynan too. Tynan has been my little brother from the very beginning. Like, but the two of them were just like there all the time, helped me get through it. But yeah, that period of like not having exactly what we're talking about for Best Jacket, that kind of mad scientist ability to, you know, be true to each book and do something different. The worst feeling is feeling like you're bored and you're struggling inside of not. And again, like, to be super clear, I wasn't bored. I loved the stories I did with Superman Unchained and with Batman.
You didn't have a release valve.
The feeling you don't have anything.
Yeah,
I finally explained it. I remember going into Dan DiDio's office because that was when I said I have to do Witches, right? Because Witches came out in, I think, 2014, it was like right around 2015, but like we planned it then. And they were very opposed to me doing anything in Image. And I just was like, listen, I can't continue with you guys. I'm going to quit. You can just rip up my contract. I need like a place. I was like, imagine you live and work at the same place. You need some place to go home and be like, you can think other things. I need to be able to go someplace like a weekend house.
Yeah.
Or just like a cabin, just something where I can, like a tree house where I can go do other things. And they were eventually, Jim was really great about it, Dan too, where they're just like, all right, you know, we'll give you a pass on this. Go do what you want. And that the whole idea is, I swear to you, honestly, I've said it since the beginning. I had a teacher once when I was like just starting out, you know, when I was in college, who wound up, they were like, the two pieces of advice they gave that were just terrific were like, write the story that is the one that you would like to pick up on a shelf more than any other one today. It doesn't have to be like the funniest or the best or the smartest or the best written or any of it. Just the one that would move you the most, like the one you'd want to find. And secondarily, they were like, the only thing that really matters is never being boring to yourself as a writer. Mm-hmm. And those two things, like that double helix of advice, like to me, I don't know. That's, you know, I'm sure I'll screw up, but that's that. And so Best Jacket to me, even the name, even though again, it's a fancy word for, you know, portmanteau for my kids' names, it's called Best Jacket because I want it to be something that it's like putting on your big boy jacket and making sure that, you know, you try your best to be adult about doing the best things you can, both as a creator when it comes to, like we were saying earlier, in the more mundane stuff like page rates and making sure people are secure that you work with, but creatively making sure that you're your best self. You know, you're doing stuff that you really love and that you feel proud of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've brought this up on the podcast before, but it, like what you're talking about sort of reminds me of George Clooney always had his like one for me, one for them sort of thing where he would do like, I'm going to do Syriana, but I'm also going to do, I don't know, like a romantic comedy or something like that. And he would always have this balance. And it seems like you were kind of just out of balance. It was like you didn't have that thing to kind of ground you when you're also doing all those other things. And, you know, that ties into my final question. Like, I do think, you know, one of the themes of what we've been talking about is like we're in an uncertain world and you're trying to find some semblance of certainty, and like doing this Kickstarter and doing the way that you've approached it has given you some semblance of certainty because you know that Tony and the rest of the team are all like covered for that first arc. You know that you have that, you have your path to the 6 issues. And I think that's important because it's like, it seems like your whole plan has given you certainty, but also gives you like an adequate amount of uncertainty. It kind of gives you that balance again, where it's like a little bit of both. It makes it a little bit more spicy and interesting for you. But I don't know. I mean, I think one thing that's interesting in 2020 is it seems like a lot of people I'm talking to, instead of relying on opportunity from others, are trying to kind of take hold of their own fate. Like, do you think it's an important time, at least for you, to kind of bet on yourself? Is that just kind of like kind of the theme for Scott Snyder in 2020 is like, you know, I need to find the right answers for myself effectively?
Yeah, 100%. You know, it's funny because I was walking with my kid just the other day, like yesterday, by CVS of all places, and there was like T-shirts outside CVS they were selling like on a rack, and one of them just said 2020 sucks, and that was it. It was just like there was no picture on it, there was no like it was just blunt.
Yeah,
it was like boring font. It was just like 2020 sucks, and I was like, I'd buy that shirt.
Yeah,
and I think really, like, I think a lot of us felt that no matter what happened, you were on some kind of semblance of a trajectory that was towards some, like, global, cooperation towards these systemic problems. There wouldn't be this kind of discord and strife, that these things it wasn't possible to kind of fall backwards, this way into countries retreating from the world stage and being so, like, maybe that's super naive, you know what I mean? Like, I completely get it. But there was a sense that, things couldn't be so uncertain,
Mm-hmm.
where you could genuinely believe, like, and I mean, you can see a picture where we are actually in civil war, you know what I mean? In 6 months from now. And I know that sounds crazy, and that's like, I don't believe that's going to happen. But there's scenarios by which you can imagine that now, like you can imagine Trump declaring some kind of early victory because there's no mail-in votes yet.
Right.
And then the mail-in votes come in, and then it's Biden, but he won't give up the White House. And then we have two presidents. And then you can see like, you can see all of the kind of crazy comic book scenarios playing out, even though I'm sure it won't go that nuts. But what it speaks to is the level of uncertainty, just like you're saying right now. Everything is uncertain. I send my kids to school. Like, our schools are open, and it was this, you were like, do we do it? Do we keep them home? I mean, New York right now is really good. I'm positive they'll close in like 2 weeks. You know what I mean? Like, I have no idea.
Mm-hmm.
But, do we have somebody come help us with the baby because we're drowning? Like, I can't. My wife is a doctor, and she hasn't worked in 2 years, and she wants to go back to work, but does she go back when COVID's in the hospitals? Well, the rates are 5% under here, right now, admissions in her hospital in New York. So why not? But who knows what's going to happen? Well, you know what else? Who knows? Everything. I could do a whole podcast on the list of things that we don't know right now. And like in my own life, like, I don't know what's going to happen at DC. You know what I mean? Like,
mm-hmm.
Marie is co-editor in chief right now. Marie is the best person to be editor in chief at that company. She's awesome. Marie knows comics inside and out, has a vision for what DC should be that I completely believe in, is a fantastic person. She's the person I've worked most closely with for the last 3 years. We worked together longer than that, but like, she was my primary person for the last few years. And, I speak to her every couple of days. Like, there's nobody that like lives and breathes comics in a better way. And yet, like, AT&T, the firings that happened, there were people that got caught up in that, like Mark Doyle and Andy Curry, who were at their most profitable division at DC Comics, like Black Label, which was doing great. But just because, who knows, like, because they made too much, or because they want to fold Black Label into something else. No, I don't know. And so it's a weather pattern. You just have no clue. You know what I mean? So the uncertainty and the kind of almost contradictory signals coming from everywhere all the time, where there's no center, it's like, well, Marie's boss, great. But everybody, it's a ghost ship because these people that you liked got fired.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. Well, similarly, you're like, there's a great boom where things have gone really well for big comics. So like, the irony is like DC's having a banner year. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Death Metal's outselling Metal. Like, honestly, like we're seeing every issue has sold out. Every, subsidiary thing has sold out, a peripheral issue. And that's not bragging. That's fascinating to me. And yet our mid list and the lower books are landing nowhere,
mm-hmm.
right now. Like, there's everything is like that. You know what I'm saying? Everything is, some things are promising and some things are completely scary, like terrifying on all levels. And there's no certainty right now. And so the only thing you can trust, I really believe it as a creator, is the story, the stuff that you believe in, and again, that's the North Star. Like, that's the thing. If you're a creator out there making something you love, it's, again, those two lessons: making the story you'd want to pick up, and being the most exciting writing to yourself, like that day. That's, even if you're an asshole and you don't know the politics of the company and you don't know how to calculate like what fan, like, you'll be fine.
Yeah.
But you know, that right now, I just feel like the only true north is beginning with that and saying, making something you care about. But then the process by which you reach out to fans, to me, now, the best way you can do it is the kind of thing that we're talking about. Not with this because of Kickstarter, but just whatever. If we can set any example with the success of Nocterra, what I hope it sets is that, and maybe I'm being like, I don't know, just stupid or arrogant because, you know, I have a big audience already coming in, and maybe it's naive to say it to people that are starting, but reach out to your audience. You know what I mean? Like, know the people you want to connect with and connect with them directly, because right now everybody is desperate for some certainty. And when they see something that you care about and a book that you're putting together because you're passionate about it and you're speaking to them honestly about that book, they understand that's certain. Like, that's a truth. In a world with like very little truth, that's a truth. James Tynan's like Department of Truth. That's a book you know you're going to like. You know what I mean? It's very honest and very much where he comes from. Crossover by Donnie. I read, you know, the early, it's fantastic. The Wilds by Vita Ayala. You know what I mean? Like those, you find things, you see them and you're like, this is mainline from this person to me, like mainline from their feelings and that. And, you know, the best thing now strategically is to try and find ways to get to fans that speaks to the nature of the book, is organic to, you know, what the book's about. Don't try and shove it in a weird way. But just like you're saying, I think that's the best certainty you can have in the arts right now. Making something that you care about and trying to give it to fans in a way that's honest about what it is, you know? Mm-hmm. And if it's commercial, don't be embarrassed.
Yeah.
Like, that's like Nocterra is commercial, you know? Like, I'll go out there and juggle the torches for it, like a bear on a unicycle, and be like, you know, like, and we have another print coming from, not, you know, just that. Why not? That's what it is, you know. But yeah, I won't do that for Barnstormers. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's not what it is.
No, I mean, the key is getting people excited, and, you know, I think you're doing that. And also, you gave me the perfect name, because now I'm going to name this episode Bear on a Unicycle. But Scott, that is all I have for you. Thank you for coming on to talk about Nocterra, Kickstarter, and everything else. I appreciate you taking the time. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with writer Scott Snyder. You can find him on Twitter at @SSnyder1835 and in his upcoming series Nocterra, which you can find on Kickstarter. As a heads up, Off Panel is once again brought to you by Sketch.com. Check out the new version of the site and consider subscribing for access to all the site's content and its members only forum. If you're a fan of Off Panel, make sure to check it out on Patreon. If you back the show on there, you not only support it, but you get early access to each week's podcast, access to weekly content, and more. Also, don't forget to subscribe to Off Panel on iTunes or Spotify and give the show a rating and review while you're at it. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by liking it on Facebook @/Sketched, that's SKTCHD, following on Twitter at @SketchComic, or following me at @SlicedFriedGold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including SB, Antonio Offen, Nick Bennett, Daniel Whitfield, Scotty Young, Susanna Polo, Jeff Weir, Reed Hinckley Barnes, Mario Tiambang, AbductedTheComic.com, Andrew Carita, Matt Mahoney, Charlie Chu, Stephen Hall, Pensacola Pop Comics, Kim Eslin, Philip Myra, Christian Shelton, Kenny Porter, Chris Pachalo, Torrin Grumbeck, Fuzz Bubbles, Christopher Todd, Transmitter Down, Waltz Comics and Books, Carl Mizell, Danny Ollie, Paul Slates, Akil Wilson, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Liana Kingus, Keegan Ray, Milton Lawson, Wesley Giff, Sean Kirkham, Carrie Small, Alistair Ross, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Ryanwan, Vita Ayala, Tara Ferguson, Dave Slusher, WMQ Comics, Akil, Kokachi, Fel White, Sean Pinello, Ken Heidelman, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, Nick Michelin, David Kelly, Rob Wilson IV, Nick Polito, Owen McGrady, Brendan Fletcher, Gary Maloney, Jonathan Nilsson, Matthew Groom, Jason Assey, Adam Bogart, Xavier Files, Matthew Taylor, Tyler Turner, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Ian Maxwell, Cliff Chang, Benjamin Shipper, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Adam Highfield, Fiona Staples, Chris O'Halloran, Mark Abnett, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonakos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Off Panel's theme song just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.